It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My wedding day was just around the corner, and I had been planning it for years. Every detail was supposed to be perfect. The venue I had chosen was everything I had ever dreamed of. An old, charming estate by the lake, passed down through my family. My grandmother had left it to me when she passed away. It was more than just a place. It was a legacy, full of memories of summers spent there, of laughter and quiet moments by the water. I had worked hard to save the money needed for the wedding. Every penny I had put aside was for this moment. But everything changed when my sister Julia decided to take it all away. The dinner started out like any other family meal. Mom was talking about how she hoped everything would go smoothly. Dad was giving me advice on marriage, advice I had heard 100 times before. And Julia, as usual, was focused on herself. She always had a way of making everything about her, but I didn't think much of it. At least not until she casually dropped the bombshell. "I know you've been saving for your wedding, Tessa," she said with a smile. The kind she always wore when she thought she was about to do something clever. "But I've borrowed some of your wedding savings. Don't worry, I'll pay it back when I get my bonus. This way, you won't have to worry about the money. I've got it covered." I froze. It took every ounce of control to not explode right there at the dinner table. Julia had always been careless with money, and now she was stealing mine. "What do you mean, borrowed?" I asked, my voice steady, though my mind was racing. "That money was for my wedding," she shrugged, not even looking at me. "Well, I knew you were stressing, so I figured you wouldn't mind if I just used it for a bit. I'm going to pay it back soon." I felt my face flush with anger. She was so calm, as if it was perfectly normal for her to take what wasn't hers. The worst part? She didn't even know that I was the real owner of the venue. It wasn't just some place I had booked for the wedding, it was mine, all mine. For years I had kept the secret from my family, even Julia. The estate had been in my name for years, part of a trust that my grandmother set up for me. I had inherited it when she passed, but I had never told anyone. I hadn't needed to, until now. I knew I had to handle this carefully. Julia didn't know what she had just done. The next day, I sat down with the documents. I had already received a letter from the estate's lawyer a few weeks ago, reminding me that everything was legally protected. I couldn't let Julia or anyone ruin this. As I looked over the documents, I could feel the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just about money, it was about respect, about legacy. It was about the years my grandmother had spent maintaining that property and the memories she had left for me. The thought of Julia destroying it for her own selfish gain made my blood boil. That night, I called the lawyer, explaining everything that had happened. He assured me that the venue was completely protected under the terms of the trust. No one could touch it without my consent, and I was the only person who could make decisions regarding the property. When I hung up the phone, I felt a bit of relief, but I knew I had to confront Julia. I waited until the next day. When Julia showed up at our family dinner again, I didn't waste time. "You didn't just steal my wedding savings, Julia," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You tried to take something much more important." Her face faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "What are you talking about? I told you I'd pay it back." "No," I said. "You've taken more than money. You've tried to take the family estate, our family's legacy." For the first time, I saw real confusion on her face. She was trying to make sense of what I was saying. "What are you talking about? The venue? That's just a place. I've already talked to the planners. It's set." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "No, Julia. The venue is mine. It's been in my name for years. It's protected under a trust that Grandma set up. You've been trying to take it, and I've been watching you." Her face went pale. "What? No, I'm the only one who can make decisions about it," I continued, cutting her off. "You didn't just take my savings, Julia. You've been trying to steal my wedding, my future. But you've underestimated me. I know what you've been planning." Julia's perfect composure cracked. She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't done. "I've been in contact with the lawyer. Everything you've done is being documented, and any attempt to interfere will have legal consequences. The venue, the estate, it all stays with me. It always has." Her eyes filled with anger, but there was a moment of hesitation, a brief flicker of doubt. "You think you've won? You think you can just hold on to everything like this? It's just a house, Tessa. I shook my head slowly. No, Julia. It's not just a house. It's everything Grandma built. And it's mine. You'll never take it. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Julia was silent now, but I could tell she was plotting her next move. I'd seen it before. She was ruthless when she wanted something, and this was no different. But for once, I wasn't afraid. This was my fight, and I was ready to win it. The next few days were a blur of tense conversations, angry messages, and desperate attempts from Julia to manipulate our parents into siding with her. She tried to tell them that I was being unreasonable, that I was ruining everything. But I had no intention of backing down. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about a wedding. It was about standing up for myself and protecting everything that mattered. And I wasn't going to let Julia tear it all apart. Then, I got a call from the lawyer. Julia had tried to make another move. She had tried to sell the venue to a wealthy investor who was looking for properties to develop. It was a bold, reckless move, but she hadn't known that I was always one step ahead. The lawyer had already sent a cease and desist letter, and the investor had backed off. Julia was furious when she found out. She came storming into the house, demanding answers. "This isn't over, Tessa. You think you can just take everything from me? You've ruined my chances." I didn't flinch. "No, Julia. You've ruined your own chances. You tried to steal from me, and now you're paying the price." She stood there, shaking with rage. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you?" "I did what I had to do to survive." I sighed, looking her in the eyes. "It's not about being better, Julia. It's about doing what's right. You may think you can control everything, but you can't. Not this time." Her face twisted in disbelief, but I could see the cracks in her confidence. She had lost, and I had won. I wasn't just protecting my wedding savings. I was protecting my future, my legacy, and my peace of mind. I had finally taken control. As the days passed, the tension in our family only seemed to grow. Julia's anger was still simmering, and I could feel it in every word she spoke, in every glance she gave me. She wasn't done fighting, but neither was I. I had spent too many years walking on eggshells around her, trying to keep the peace, trying to avoid confrontation. This time, I couldn't let her have her way. I had already lost too much to let her take everything from me. Julia's next move was something I hadn't anticipated. She reached out to my fiancé, Mark, trying to turn him against me. "Tessa's being unreasonable, you know," she said, her voice smooth and convincing. "She's not thinking about the wedding at all. She's obsessed with the venue. You should talk to her." Mark came to me, concern in his eyes, and I could tell something wasn't right. "What's going on, Tess?" he asked, looking at me in that way he always did when he was worried. "Julia's been talking to me, saying that you're getting too focused on the venue and not enough on the wedding. She's worried about you." I felt a pang of frustration. "Of course she's worried," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "She's worried because I'm not letting her control everything. I'm not letting her take over my wedding, Mark. She's already taken what isn't hers." Mark was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching mine. "But Tess, the venue. Why is it so important to you?" I took a deep breath, my mind racing back to the first time I had walked into the venue. The way the light filtered through the trees, the smell of the flowers blooming by the lake, the soft whispers of the past that seemed to fill the air. It wasn't just a venue. It was the place where I had learned to love, to dream, to remember. My grandmother had passed away long before I was ready, but her spirit lived on in that house, in that garden. It was more than a location. It was my family's history. "I'm not obsessed with the venue, Mark," I said, my voice softening. "I'm protecting it. It's part of who I am, part of my family's legacy. Grandma left it to me. She made sure it stayed with me. This isn't about a place for a party. It's about something much deeper than that." Mark looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the understanding in his eyes. "I get it now," he said quietly. "You're right. This isn't just a wedding. It's about everything that's come before it. And everything that's going to come after." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my chest. At least Mark understood. I couldn't say the same for Julia, though. She was still out there, trying to figure out how to get what she thought was rightfully hers. And I knew she wasn't done yet. A few days later, I received a letter from Julia's lawyer. It was a demand to settle, a proposal to make everything go away. Julia had been working behind the scenes, trying to negotiate a way to get me to relinquish control of the venue. The letter was full of legal jargon, but the message was clear. She wanted the estate, and she wanted me to give it up quietly. The offer was insulting. She was willing to pay me back a fraction of what she had stolen, as though that would make everything okay. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Julia thought she could just buy me off, erase the years of hurt, the betrayal, the broken trust, with a simple check. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about respect. It was about standing up for what was mine and what my family had worked for. I wasn't about to let Julia walk away with everything. I had already taken legal steps to secure the venue, but now it was time to make sure she understood just how far I would go to protect it. I contacted the lawyer again, asking for his help in responding to Julia's demands. He assured me that there was no way Julia could force me to give up the venue, but he also warned me that the situation could escalate. Julia wasn't the type to take no for an answer. I spent the next few days preparing for what was coming. I had made up my mind to face Julia head-on, to show her that she couldn't manipulate me any longer. The game had changed, and I was in control now. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. Julia showed up at my door, her face a mask of forced calm. "I'm not going to let you ruin everything, Tessa," she said, her voice low and angry. "You think you've won? You've only made things worse. If you don't give in now, you'll lose more than just the wedding. You'll lose your family." I felt my pulse quicken. I had been prepared for this. "No, Julia," I said, standing my ground. "You're the one who's lost everything. You think you can just take what's not yours, but it doesn't work like that. The estate, the venue, it's mine. It was always mine, and I'm not letting you take it from me." Her eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. "You really think you can stop me? I've already made plans. You'll never be able to undo what I've done." "I already have," I replied, my voice steady. "Everything you've done is being documented. The lawyer is watching. The trust is in place, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's over." For a moment, Julia was silent, her anger rising, but I could see the cracks forming in her facade. She had thought she could control everything, but now she knew the truth. She wasn't in charge anymore. "This isn't over," she spat, turning on her heel and storming off. "I'll find a way. I always do." I didn't chase after her. I didn't need to. I had already won. The next few days were quiet, but I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. The battle wasn't just about a venue, a wedding, or money. It was about protecting everything that mattered: my family, my history, my future. And I had fought for it, with everything I had. I called Mark later that evening. "Julia's backing off," I said, the relief in my voice unmistakable. "It's over." "Good," he said, his voice warm. "Now we can focus on the wedding, on us, on what's really important." As I sat down in the living room, looking out at the peaceful lake beyond the window, I realized that Julia's betrayal had taught me something important. I didn't need to rely on anyone to fight my battles for me. I was strong enough to protect what mattered, to stand up for myself and for my family. And with that strength, I was ready to step into the future, together with Mark, in the place that had always been home to me. The wedding would go on, but more than that, my legacy would continue. And that was the most important thing of all. A few weeks went by, and life seemed to return to some semblance of normal. The wedding planning was back on track, and I could almost feel the excitement building again. But even though Julia had backed off for now, I knew it wasn't over. She hadn't given up. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there, plotting her next move, looking for a way to get what she thought was rightfully hers. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about control. And Julia wouldn't let go that easily. The first sign that something was off came when I received an unexpected phone call late one night. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, but I picked it up anyway, thinking it might be a vendor for the wedding. But when I answered, it wasn't a vendor at all. It was Julia's voice, sharp and full of anger. "I warned you, Tessa," she said, her words cutting through the silence. "You think this is over? You've made a huge mistake." I felt my heart race as I listened to her. "What are you talking about, Julia?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've already tried to take everything from me. It's done. No, she snapped, her tone growing more frantic. You don't understand. You've made things so much worse than they had to be. I was trying to help you, but now you've forced my hand. You really think I'm going to let you keep the venue, the property? I'll fight you for it. And I'll win. Her words sent a chill down my spine. I had been right all along. Julia wasn't done. She wasn't going to let this go. The legal battle over the estate wasn't over, even if she had backed down from the initial confrontation. She was desperate now, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. I'm not afraid of you, Julia, I said, more to reassure myself than anything else. The trust is in place. You can't take what's mine. Oh, I'm not trying to take it from you, Tessa, she replied, her voice suddenly cold. But you'll wish you never fought me when I'm done. The line went dead before I could respond, and I sat there for a long moment, staring at the phone in my hand. I didn't know what she was planning, but I knew it couldn't be good. I wasn't going to let her intimidate me. I had already fought for the estate once, and I was prepared to do it again. The next few days were filled with tension and unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that Julia was getting closer to something, closer to a plan that could hurt me. I didn't trust her. I couldn't, not anymore. And I didn't want to wait around to find out what her next move would be. I decided to take action. I contacted the lawyer again, explaining what had happened with Julia's call and expressing my concerns. He reassured me that there was no way she could legally take the venue from me, but I knew that didn't mean she wouldn't try. There had to be something I could do to protect myself and my family's legacy from whatever she was planning next. That afternoon, I made an unplanned visit to the estate. I needed to check on things, to make sure everything was still in order. I drove down the familiar gravel path, the trees lining the driveway casting long shadows in the fading afternoon light. When I arrived, the property looked peaceful, untouched by the chaos that had swirled around it for the past few weeks. The garden, which I had worked so hard to restore, was still thriving. I could hear the faint sound of the lake's gentle waves lapping against the shore, a soothing, calming sound. It was still the place I had always loved, the place that felt like home. But as I stepped out of the car, something caught my eye. Near the entrance of the property, there was a car I didn't recognize, a sleek black SUV parked just off the gravel path. I frowned, wondering who it could be. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the last thing I needed was another confrontation. As I walked closer, I saw Julia standing near the entrance of the house, talking to two men. They were dressed in expensive suits, their posture professional but distant. They looked like businessmen, maybe investors. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. Julia had found someone else to back her up, someone to help her take what didn't belong to her. "What's going on, Julia?" I called out, my voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of anger. She turned, her eyes widening in surprise, before quickly regaining her composure. "Tessa, this is not what you think," she said, her voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "These gentlemen are investors. They're interested in the property. We're just having a discussion about the potential." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "You've been trying to sell the property, haven't you?" Julia hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. "I'm not selling anything, Tessa. I'm simply exploring options." "Exploring options," I repeated, the bitterness rising in my throat. "Is that what you're calling it now? You've been trying to take this place from me for months. You think you can just buy me out and take my legacy?" Julia's expression hardened, and the men standing next to her looked at me with cold, uninterested eyes. One of them stepped forward, his hand extending toward me. "Perhaps we could discuss this inside," he said, his tone too polite, too practiced. "We can make you a very generous offer for the estate." I shook my head, standing my ground. "You don't get it, do you? The estate is not for sale, not at any price." The businessman's expression didn't change, but Julia's face turned a deep shade of red, her anger seeping through her carefully constructed mask. "You really think you can stop this?" she hissed. "You think you can keep everyone from seeing the truth? You're just holding on to this place because you think it gives you some sense of control, but it's not yours to keep." "I'm not holding on to it for control, Julia," I said, stepping closer. "I'm holding on to it because it's mine. Because my family's legacy is worth more than whatever quick cash you're trying to get from this." The tension in the air was thick as I stared at Julia, the weight of everything we had gone through hanging between us. "It's over, Julia," I said firmly. "You've lost." For a long moment, Julia said nothing. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed off, her investors following her, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence that followed. I watched them leave, a strange sense of finality settling over me. I didn't know if this was the last I would hear from Julia. But I knew one thing for sure: she couldn't take what wasn't hers. The venue, my family's legacy, and my future were mine to protect. And no one, especially not Julia, could change that. The days that followed felt quieter, more peaceful, but there was still a nagging sense of unease. Even though Julia had backed off for now, I knew that she wasn't someone who would accept defeat easily. The real challenge wasn't over, it was just beginning. But I refused to live in fear, constantly waiting for her next move. I had fought for this property before, and I would do it again if I had to. The strength I had found in myself during these past few weeks, in protecting my family's legacy, gave me the confidence that no matter what came next, I could handle it. It was then that I received an unexpected call. It wasn't from Julia this time, it was from our father. His voice on the other end was softer than I expected, filled with regret. "Tessa," he began, his voice hesitant. "I need to talk to you. I've made a mistake. I didn't see what was happening with Julia. And I'm sorry, she's been manipulating us all." I was silent for a moment, taken aback by his admission. My father, who had always been so protective of Julia, who had stood by her through everything, was now acknowledging the truth. It felt like a weight was lifting off my shoulders. For so long, I had felt alone in this battle, but now, my father was standing with me. "I should have listened to you, Tess," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "I didn't know the full extent of what she was doing, but I see it now. I've been a fool, and I'm sorry." Hearing him admit his mistake was more than I had expected, and I didn't know how to respond at first. There were so many years of tension, so much hurt, that I wasn't sure how to feel, but I knew that this was a turning point. We both had lost so much, but there was still a chance to rebuild. Not just the property, but our relationship. "It's okay, Dad," I finally said, my voice soft. "It's not too late to make things right. I'm just glad you see it now. I don't want to keep fighting. I want to move forward." We spent a long time talking after that. He explained how Julia had been manipulating everyone around her, how she had played on his emotions and manipulated him into supporting her. It was clear that his relationship with Julia had been built on false promises and lies. My heart hurt for him. He had trusted her, just as I had once trusted her. But now he understood that trust needed to be earned, not taken. As the days turned into weeks, the situation with Julia seemed to cool down. The lawyers had worked out the final details of the estate, and it was clear that Julia's claims had no legal standing. The venue was safe, and so was everything it represented. But the emotional toll was harder to shake. I had fought so hard, had been pushed to my limits, and in the end, I had won. But at what cost? The hardest part was knowing that I might never fully trust Julia again. She had crossed a line that couldn't easily be undone. I would never forget the feeling of betrayal, of watching her manipulate and deceive her way through our family. But I also knew that forgiveness was something I had to choose for myself, not for her. If I was going to heal, I had to let go of the anger that had built up inside me over the years. One afternoon, after a long day of finalizing the wedding plans, I sat alone by the lake at the estate, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The property, the garden, the house, it was all coming back to life. I could almost hear my grandmother's voice in the wind, reminding me that everything had its time and place. The garden was blooming once more, the dock restored, and the house had a warmth to it that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was more than just a house now. It was a symbol of resilience, of standing strong when everything seemed to fall apart. Mark joined me soon after, sitting beside me on the old wooden dock. We didn't need to say much. The quiet, the beauty of the place, the feeling of peace that was finally returning, it was enough. "You were right," he said after a while, breaking the silence. "This place, it's special. It's more than just a venue. It's a legacy. I see it now. I see what you were fighting for." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. It's not just about the place, Mark, I said softly. It's about the people. It's about the memories we create here. And it's about protecting what matters. We sat there for a while longer, the sounds of the lake and the birds in the trees filling the air. It was peaceful, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like everything was finally falling into place. My wedding would happen as planned, but more importantly, I had protected the one thing that mattered most: my family's history, my legacy. Julia had tried to take everything from me, to tear apart the very foundation of what I had worked for, but in the end, I had found something much stronger than the anger and betrayal that had once consumed me. I had found peace, and as I looked at the lake, at the garden that had once felt so fragile, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories aren't the ones we fight for. Sometimes they're the ones we learn to let go of, because in doing so, we find the strength to rebuild. In the end, the wedding wasn't just about two people coming together. It was about healing. It was about moving forward, about rebuilding the pieces of a life that had been broken but never truly lost. And as I walked down the aisle toward Mark, I knew that the future was mine to shape, and nothing, no one could take that from me. The venue, the estate, it was still mine. But more than that, my future was mine to build. And I was ready.